5,000 battle-hardened soldiers marched into the thick Scottish mist, and not a single soul ever walked back out. The 9th Hispanic Legion was the pride of Rome, decorated across 3 continents, forged in the crucible of the bloodiest wars the ancient world had ever produced. These were not conscripts, not farmers handed a spear and pointed toward the enemy. These were professional killers, men who had stared down charging cavalry, survived ambushes in foreign wilderness, and rebuilt themselves from the edge of annihilation more than once. Yet they vanished from history without leaving behind a single drop of blood or a broken blade. No battle report, no grave, no final dispatch from a dying commander trying to leave something behind, no list of casualties. The 9th Hispanic Legion, one of the oldest, most decorated, most battle-tested units in the entire Roman military machine, vanished from the pages of recorded history somewhere between one document and the next. 12 years, 5,000 men, 0 explanation. And here is what makes this different from every other ancient mystery. Rome documented everything, every supply shipment, every troop rotation, every stone laid in every wall the army ever built. The individual names of soldiers on retirement certificates. The Romans carved their existence into stone because stone endures, and Rome, above all other considerations, intended to endure forever. And that system has nothing coherent to say about what happened to the 9th Hispanic Legion. No transfer order, no record of disbandment, no account of their final campaign. In the archives of an empire that documented the names of individual horses in the imperial cavalry, an entire legion of 5,000 professional soldiers dissolved into silence so clean it feels deliberate. That silence is not the silence of lost records. That is the silence of something Rome chose not to say.
If you want to hear more stories like this, battles where strategy defeated strength, where the impossible became real, where one decision changed the course of nations, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of history.
Before we can understand the disappearance, we have to understand what we're talking about when we say the 9th Hispanic Legion. Because the temptation, the easy mistake, is to picture 5,000 interchangeable soldiers in identical armor. The kind of unit whose loss might go unnoticed in the administrative shuffle of an empire managing 30 legions across 3 continents. The 9th was not that. The 9th Hispanic Legion was a century-old institution with a personality, a history, an identity, forged across decades of continuous warfare on multiple continents. They were not a designation, they were a culture. Soldiers who joined the 9th didn't just join a military unit, they joined a lineage stretching back to the blood-soaked hills of the Iberian Peninsula, where the Legion had first proven itself in the grinding wars of the late Roman Republic. They earned the name Hispana, the Hispanic, in Spain, fighting the kind of brutal, terrain-dominated irregular warfare that destroyed conventional armies. They survived Rome's catastrophic civil wars, the period when Roman soldiers were killing other Roman soldiers, and institutional loyalty became the difference between survival and execution. They emerged from that chaos intact, functional, dangerous, and were rewarded with increasingly critical postings. When Emperor Claudius decided to invade Britain in 43 AD, he chose 4 legions for the crossing. The selection was not random. You do not send ceremonial units or half-strength formations to conquer an unconquered island defended by tribes who had never submitted to anything. You send your best, your most experienced, your most psychologically durable. The 9th was among those 4. They crossed the English Channel in flat-bottomed transport ships in the gray cold of a British autumn onto a beach at the edge of a world Rome had only half imagined, and began the violent, grinding work of turning a wild island into a Roman province. They fought through the brutal early years of occupation, through forests and marshes, through the organized resistance of tribes who had been warriors since birth, and knew their territory in ways Roman commanders could never fully replicate. And then came Boudica. In 60 AD, the queen of the Iceni tribe ignited a rebellion that came closer to expelling Rome from Britain than anything before or after. She was not a local chieftain leading a raid. She was a strategic commander leading a coordinated uprising that hit Roman positions across the province simultaneously. She burned Colchester, the Roman colonial capital. She burned London. She massacred the inhabitants of both cities with a brutality that Roman historians recorded with visible horror. The death toll reached tens of thousands. When the 9th Legion marched north to intercept her forces, she was ready. She hit them in open country with a force so overwhelming in numbers that the infantry was essentially destroyed on first contact. The commanding officer survived by retreating with the cavalry. The foot soldiers, the core of the legion, died in the field, not all of them, but enough that what remained was a shattered fragment of what had marched out. What the 9th did next tells you everything about what kind of unit they were. Because they rebuilt, they absorbed replacements, reorganized, recovered their identity and their strength. Within years, they were functional again. Within a generation, they were back to full establishment. The Boudica disaster became part of their institutional story, not a wound that ended them, but a test they had survived. By the early 2nd century, garrisoned at Eboracum, the fortress city they had built with their own hands on the banks of the river Ouse, the city we now call York. The 9th Hispanic Legion was a 100-year-old killing machine with deep roots in the province of Britain and the kind of combat experience that cannot be manufactured or replaced. This is the unit that disappeared. Not green recruits handed a shield and pointed north. Not an understrength garrison formation slowly hollowed out by peacetime routine. The 9th Hispanic Legion at the moment of their vanishing was among the most experienced military units on Earth. Whatever happened to them was not a matter of inexperience meeting a situation it couldn't handle. York was the last place in Roman Britain that felt safe, not just administratively, psychologically. South of York, the province functioned. Roads connected settlements. Tax collectors made their rounds. The courts operated. Roman law was more than a theoretical concept. The machinery of empire hummed along with the self-sustaining momentum that was Rome's greatest achievement. North of York, that machinery began to seize. Administrative structures thinned. Military presence became less about governance and more about containment. The comfortable certainties of provincial life gave way to something rawer and more contingent. And north of the line that would eventually become Hadrian's Wall, which hadn't been built yet, which was still years away from existing, there was no Roman governance at all. There was only Caledonia. The Romans had various names for the peoples of the far north. We call them the Picts, the painted people, a name that came later. What the Romans knew from 50 years of painful interaction was that the Caledonians were categorically different from the enemies Rome had learned to defeat in the south. The southern British tribes, fierce as they were, could be beaten in pitched battle. Roman discipline, Roman formation tactics, Roman logistical superiority, applied correctly, these advantages were usually decisive. You could fight the southern tribes by Rome's rules, and by Rome's rules, Rome usually won. The Caledonians had watched this process for 50 years and drawn the correct conclusion: don't fight by Rome's rules. They understood their landscape with an intimacy that no Roman commander, however talented, could replicate. They knew where the ground turned soft and swallowed marching columns to the knee, where the tree canopy closed over forest paths and turned the tortoise-shell formation, Rome's defensive masterpiece, into a liability instead of a strength. Where a narrow valley could funnel 5,000 soldiers into a corridor so tight that their numbers became irrelevant, that the men in front couldn't be reinforced by the men in back, that the entire calculus of Roman military superiority simply stopped applying. They didn't seek the decisive engagement. They bled. They raided supply lines. They hit outposts in the dark and were gone before dawn. They made the cost of existing in their territory, not conquering it, just existing in it, higher than the returns could justify. Agricola had understood this problem firsthand. He had pushed deep into Caledonian territory in the 80s AD, driven further north than any Roman commander before him. He had forced a pitched battle at a site the Romans called Mons Graupius, and won it. His son-in-law Tacitus wrote about it in language that suggested a defining Roman victory. And within years, Rome had quietly retreated south. Because winning the battle and winning the land were entirely different propositions. Caledonia had absorbed the defeat, withdrawn into its forests and hills, and waited. And eventually Rome had concluded, without quite admitting it publicly, that the return on further northern conquest did not justify the investment. This is the frontier the 9th Legion was watching from York, a border with a documented history of swallowing Roman ambition and giving nothing back. And then, around 117 AD, something in northern Britain went catastrophically wrong. The evidence is fragmentary, the kind of historical residue that survives when the primary records have been lost or suppressed. The historian Cornelius Fronto, writing decades after the events, makes an oblique reference to serious military losses in Britain during Hadrian's reign. There are traces in other sources of emergency reinforcements crossing the channel from the Rhine. Not a routine rotation, but additional troops moved quickly, which only happens when the situation in the receiving province has outgrown what the existing garrison can handle. Something was happening in the north. Something large enough to register in sources written decades later. Something that required a response beyond what Britain's military establishment could provide from its own resources. And then Hadrian himself arrived. 122 AD. The Emperor of Rome came to Britain personally. Emperors do not make personal visits to frontier provinces out of curiosity. They come when the situation requires the authority and attention that only an emperor can provide. Hadrian's visit to Britain was a crisis response, and what he ordered upon arrival confirmed it. The construction of a wall, 73 miles, coast to coast across northern Britain, stone and turf and timber, garrisoned at regular intervals, representing an investment of labor and resources that dwarfs almost any other construction project in Roman-British history. That wall was not built as a symbol. Symbols don't cost that much. That wall was built because someone, Hadrian, his generals, his military advisors, had done the strategic arithmetic and reached a conclusion that Roman military doctrine did not normally permit. The territory beyond this line cannot be taken. Draw the border here, step back behind it, hold what we have. Rome had tried the north had responded, and now Rome was formally, permanently, acknowledging the result. Through all of this, through the crisis that triggered it, through the reinforcements rushed to contain it, through the emperor's personal intervention, through the construction of the most significant military fortification in Roman-British history, the 9th Hispanic Legion does not appear. In the records of an emergency serious enough to reshape the entire northern strategy of the empire, the unit that was stationed closest to the crisis, the unit that had been the primary military presence on that frontier for decades, is simply absent. There is a version of this story that is clean and dramatic and deeply satisfying. The 9th Legion marched north into Caledonian territory, ordered to pacify the frontier, to push back against the raids and pressure that were destabilizing the province, and walked into an ambush so perfectly executed that none of them came back. 5,000 soldiers swallowed by a single catastrophic engagement in a Scottish valley. Their eagle standard captured, their bodies left where they fell. The whole disaster happening too fast and too far from Roman administrative reach to generate the paperwork that would have survived. It is a good story. The problem is that Rome knew how to process catastrophic military losses, and the 9th received none of that processing. When 3 full legions were annihilated in the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD, ambushed and destroyed by Germanic tribesmen in 5 hours of coordinated slaughter, the empire did not go quiet. It went loud with grief that echoed across generations.